Welcome, everyone. It is Tuesday. It is 4 p.m. ET, and you have found Mighty Mysteries on a Mighty Blaze. And we are so pleased that you are joining us today. I'm your host, Hank Phillippi Ryan, and we have the absolute pleasure today of talking with Lynne Reeves, the author of The Dangers of an Ordinary Night. She has written several books before, fiction and nonfiction. This is her first domestic suspense, and it is just marvelous. Welcome, Lynn. We're so glad that you're here today. This book just came out a week ago, and I love it, you all. You know, we bring you authors here on A Mighty Blaze that our producers, Maxwell Gregory and Mary Weber O'Malley, and I get together and decide what books we'd love you to know about. And Lynne Reeves Griffin. I know I've known her for a long time, and I still think of her as Lynn Griffin, but writing as Lynne Reeves, her real name is Lynne Reeves Griffin, has written a marvelous novel of domestic suspense, of family suspense, really. It's poignant and tender and loving and insightful and thrilling, and you will adore it. It's very emotional. And there is someone calling me, of course they are, as they always do during Mighty Mysteries. Anyway, if you are new to A Mighty Blaze, let me tell you about it a little bit. It was started by the powerhouse duo of Jenna Blum and Caroline Levitt at the beginning of the pandemic to sort of bring us all together in book world, readers and writers and authors and anyone who loves storytelling, to sort of give us a place 24/7 where you could hear from authors and think about books and maybe discover the next wonderful thing that you are going to read. And speaking of the next wonderful thing, we are here today to talk about The Dangers of an Ordinary Night by Lynne Reeves. And we are Lynn is generously giving away a copy of this book to one lucky commenter. So before the end of the broadcast today, which would be about 4:35 or 40, make sure you leave a question for Lynn. Lynn, finally you get to talk. Welcome, 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 and congratulations on this wonderful launch of The Dangers of an Ordinary Night.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm a big Mighty Mystery fan, so it's quite an honor to be here with you, and I can't wait to chat.
It's so funny because you and I have known each other for, I think, from the beginning of when I started writing. You were really one of my first mentors in book world, and it's such a joy to see your career just zoom. And you're so active in book world and writing world, and you're such a wonderful teacher as well as author. Has it been a joy for you to be involved in this community?
Oh, 1,000% yes. And I do remember back with your Charlie Mysteries, and I remember coming to your first launch, and it was so exciting. I think the wonderful part of this community is how much everyone really wants to support one another. It's really the rising tide lifts all boats idea, and I love that. It's been super fun for me to be part of this community. I have always been a creative person, and to write fiction is a real honor. So to have my work out in the world is important, and it's just a wonderful opportunity to talk about the issues that I try to dig into.
And that's what Jenna and Caroline, why they started A Mighty Blaze, talk about a rising tide lifting all boats. And there are some wonderful boats out there, of which we are talking about one of them this afternoon, The Dangers of an Ordinary Night. Let me, for all of you, introduce Lynn in a more formal way so you know a little bit about her, and I'm going to read this so I get it right. Lynne Reeves Griffin is an internationally recognized family counselor, public speaker, teacher, and writer of fiction and nonfiction. Her work has appeared in Parents, Psychology Today, Fiction Writers Review, and many more. Lynn regularly appears as a media guest expert to discuss contemporary family life and preventive mental health. And you can see both of those topics so brilliantly in this book. Writing as Lynne Griffin, she is the author of 3 family-focused novels. Writing as Lynne Reeves, The Dangers of an Ordinary Night is her first novel, as I said, of domestic suspense. And again, we are giving away a copy of it today. So leave a comment in the chat, ask Lynn a question, ask about her background, ask about her research, ask where she got the idea, ask about her love of theater, because we will get to that as well very soon. Kirkus loved this book, among other rave reviews, and they called it Reeves' uncommonly assured novel. And I'm interested about that because if it's your first domestic suspense, the idea that Kirkus, notoriously tough, called it uncommonly assured. What did you think when you saw that?
Well, I have to say, my heart skipped a beat. I would have to say, because Kirkus is notoriously challenging in their reviews and the way they read, very close read. So I was delighted. It's a compliment. I feel that even though I bring other novels to the table, and I've done this before on the fiction side, this is a new genre for me. And so that compliment meant a great deal.
Exactly. And it does feel, and obviously it doesn't feel like a debut novel. And it does feel as if it's written by a person, which indeed it is, who really knows her stuff about families and about motivation and about emotion and about the theater. Just to sort of ground all of our many listeners, and I want to welcome you all. Here's Sherry and Sharon and so many, Catherine, and so many wonderful people who your fans who are here today. And when I look this way, hi Sylvia, hi Sharon. When I look this way, I'm looking at the comments. So don't think that I'm looking away from you. I'm looking at you. For people who haven't read this book yet, tell us a little bit about just the plot.
Sure. Well, it starts off with an abduction of two girls outside a performing arts high school in Boston. I use the location of Boston because it's very familiar to me and near and dear to me, and I've lived and worked there for a number of years. And then the story really digs into family life from there because the two girls are found. But what becomes the mystery is what happened to them for the 2 days that they were gone. And so enter a number of characters who play a role in trying to figure out what happened to the girls, but also to try to figure out what led up to the abduction. So it's an exploration of family life. It's an exploration of the deceptions that happen sometimes in families, particularly around the topic of addiction, why it is that people keep those private struggles from others, especially the ones they love the most. And so there are a number of themes here that I dig into. One, the masks we wear in the relationships that we have, which mimics the whole theater plot. The blind spots that we have when we're so close to someone that they really can't see that they might be in trouble emotionally. And then finally, what does it mean to take care of oneself versus to caretake? There's a whole exploration here about the role that women play in caretakers in their relationships with their partners and also as caretakers to their children. And when is that at the expense of oneself?
I was fascinated by something you just said about why something happened, because in a psychological thriller, the way this book is, it's not just a question of who done it and what happened, but a deep look into why such a thing would happen, what the motivations of the people. And we often think about the solution of the problem instead of the beginning of the problem.
Right. And, I absolutely wanted to follow the conventions of the genre, which is to give readers what they hope for, which is a suspenseful story with twists and turns and a plot that feels fresh and new. That really mattered to me. But at the same time, as a family counselor, it was also super important for me to do a deep dive into what is true about relationships, which is that we can really only be as close to the people that we love if we're honest. That if we're holding back and if we're not telling them some of the things that are most important to us, we're missing each other. And that can have consequences. And in this case, it has extreme consequences.
I mean, the essence of this book, besides family, is family secrets and all the secrets that we keep from each other. Who has a secret and what is the secret and why are they keeping it and what will happen if the secret is told. And you explore that so beautifully. Everyone has a secret in this book. Did you consciously give everyone a secret? Do you think that's what makes a character be interesting?
I think I gave everyone a secret because I believe that everybody has a secret. I think there are parts of all of our lives that we prefer not to share or disclose. And sometimes those don't affect other people, but often they do. And in the case of this main story, which is the story of a woman and her husband and their teenage daughter who attends the performing arts school, there's an addiction in that family, and no one is talking about it. It is the very present, very real experience of everyone in this family, but no one is talking about it and no one is addressing it. And so it plays out for sure in the lives of these people, because how could it not? But at the same time, it's not in the light. No one's talking about it.
And was that difficult to write about? I mean, the book is so respectful and so careful, and not sugar coated, but very gorgeously honest about things. Was that a juggle for you?
That is a really lovely thing to say. I feel that it kind of goes to my worldview, which is that I believe that when people struggle, they're doing their best. I like to write characters who may be quite flawed, but it's really their intention to do better. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's absolutely true with the topic of addiction that people are often doing their best, even despite some of the bad decisions that they're making, or some of the decisions that they're making that are very painfully impacting their family. So again, I feel like it's people are not making choices. It's not an issue of weak character. It's an issue of a medical struggle, a challenge. And though that does not exonerate people who make difficult decisions that impact other people, it certainly needs to be at least understood. So if people walk away from reading the book and they say, I can empathize but not condone, or I don't like that decision that character made, or that person exasperated me, but at the same time I feel compassion for them, then I feel like I've done my job.
I mean, I read another wonderful review of this book where the reviewer talked about how she didn't like all the characters, but she understood them and understood why they did what they did. That is a powerful moment.
Sure, because we don't always like the decisions that we make in our own lives, right? Or we might not like some of the decisions that the people we love make. And at the same time, we want to be able to empathize. Empathy is not devoid of responsibility, and empathy is not, endorsing behavior that might be challenging. Empathy is to say, I can feel for you. I don't have to like what you did, but I can feel for you. And so one of my characters, the husband of the main character who struggles with a gambling addiction, to me, he has a lot of likable qualities, though the dire straits that he puts his family in are really just that.
And you can see him struggling through life and see him struggling for equilibrium and see him struggling in these amazing scenes, struggling to do what he thinks is the right thing when it's just gratingly, heartbreakingly wrong for all involved. Rewinding a tiny bit, I was saying earlier that you are an expert in family life and preventive mental health. Why did you decide to make this book be fiction? Did it start out as fiction?
I grapple with whether or not to write something as nonfiction or fiction each time I write a book.
Oh, why?
Every time. Yeah, because I feel like some family life topics lend themselves to be prescriptive. In other words, understand this, consider doing that. But some aspects of family life do not lend themselves to being prescriptive. And I think addiction is one of those things. It's a very challenging experience, and it's very personal. But at the same time, there's not do this, and therefore you'll feel better, or talk about this, and this, and then suddenly you won't have relationship strife. It's more complicated than that. And so the more I tried to consider how I would tackle a book like this about addiction and the impact on marriage in particular, I really came to the conclusion that that prescriptive take wasn't for me. It wasn't really where I could come from most authentically. And so that's why it became fictionalized. And the story is now much more a story of one family that I'm hoping allows other families some safe distance to explore the issues.
I mean, it's interesting when you talk about not being prescriptive, but what it is sort of observational, sort of a case study that you're letting us understand truths by viewing it, by being there with two families who are having to deal with this, and allowing us to maybe gain some insight about what they're doing right or wrong, or when we say, oh, my heart goes out to you, to understand why that happens, why we feel that way, and why people don't do the things that we think they should do, because that non-prescriptive element, that's just so wonderfully put. I mean, again, another great review I read about this said that book clubs will gobble this up. And what do you want book clubs to talk about when they read this book, when they see the girls, Tally and June, and the characters that we know in real life, the ambitious teenager, the arrogant teacher, the manipulative parents, the detective with a secret. There are all these people who play a role in this book. What have book clubs said to you? Or you've only been out for a week.
It's
Have you
only
been
been out for a
a little
week.
better? What do you want them to talk about?
Oh, I would love for them to be able to recognize people they know, people they love in these characters. I would want them to be honest about the things that these characters do that are problematic. I would be, believe it or not, delighted if there were a heated conversation about some of the choices these characters make,
Oh,
because why not have a heated conversation about the choices people make that impact others? But at the end of the day, I think that what I'm really hoping for is that people would be able to talk about addiction in a really honest, authentic way, and that people would be able to say, I've experienced this in some way in my life. I've experienced this at some distance, maybe at a close distance, maybe at a further away distance. I've had family members who have struggled with mental health challenges. And so I know that bringing it into the light is the best place to gain that empathy.
and this is a perfect book for that. Sharon Carlson person is saying, always looking for new books for our book club. And Dangers of an Ordinary Night has so much to talk about. I read something that said, I'm holding this up so I can read it perfectly. Perfect for fans of Celeste Ng and Megan Abbott. An exploration of explosive family secrets that are often hidden in plain sight. And the two girls who go missing, Tally and June, are best friends. As you were saying, they were at an audition, and they left at night to go home, and they were taken away. It's also such a story about how people react to such a thing, and you bring the media in. We've all seen on TV the grieving parents pleading for their children to be brought home, to come home, and that tension between their need to get the word out and their revulsion of having to stand in front of live television cameras and essentially perform is so chilling in this book. Talk a little bit about that conflict, and about that necessity, and about the reaction of people to sorrow and tragedy.
Right. Well, I think that the whole performative nature of what we choose to disclose in our lives to people we love and to people that we are trying to impress is all throughout this story. So there's a performative nature even in a close marriage. There is what I will tell you and what I won't tell you. There's a performative nature in the way in which we parent our children. I want you to see my child as successful. I want you to see my child as worthy. And so there's a lot of that running through the story in the background, but in the foreground is the exploration of what if you don't want to be someone who's part of the spotlight? What if you do, and what if you don't? What if you're the kind of person that doesn't want to participate in that, but you must? The main character feels that she must put on that mask of performance in order to get her daughter back.
And it's so touching, and so tender to read about that. And I'm picking up on all the words you're saying: acting and performance,
Yes.
and performative, and on stage, and spotlight, and all those theater words. And the theater is so much the essence of the book, and so much to talk about that. It takes place. The abduction takes place after an audition. Talk a little bit about these teenagers and what they're doing and how that affects their lives, and then we'll go on from there to talk about more theater things.
Sure. So these two young girls, and there's a boy showcased in the story as well. They're all upperclassmen. at a performing arts high school. And it's very much the kind of performing arts high school that is by audition only. There is a track for these students to go on to theater in New York or film in California. This is a elite performing track. And so they are seeking celebrity and fame. They are seeking careers in the performing arts. And so with that comes the pressure to be the best, to be the brightest, to be the star. And at the same time, they're also just teenagers, and they're dealing with the teenage things that we would expect them to be dealing with: friendship, boyfriends, girlfriends, right? And so they're dealing with those very age appropriate things in an environment that is high pressure, high stakes, and their parents are involved. So we've got stage mothers in there. We've got directors, people who have an opinion about the way their lives should move forward. And that's, again, a recipe for making some good decisions and making some not so good decisions. And both of these girls do.
And it's so interesting. I mean, the whole layers of how you've done this so beautifully. I mean, here are the, as you say, the teachers and the directors and the costumers and they're telling people how to be. They're telling these students how to be. And your book is so much about how we never outgrow someone telling us, whether it's a person or society, telling us how to be. The thing that's so secret about this book, and there was a question earlier from Sherry that asked how you got the title for this book. The idea, the structure of this book, I call you the queen of structure, and you know that. I've told you that a million times, because this book has a gorgeous structure, unique and original, and absolutely irresistible. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So I've always been, very, very fond of the theater. I have wonderful memories of going to the theater in New York, my older sister taking me there and sharing her love of it as well with me. So it's always been important to me. I acted in high school and college and somewhat beyond, a little bit beyond. So it's always been important to me. And I always knew that I would revisit the theater in some way, shape, or form. But in this case, not as a performer, but as a writer who chose the setting. And I decided that the setting, for so many reasons as it relates to our intimate relationships, but also as it relates to addiction, brought me to the performative nature that we've been talking about, the masks people wear, the choices people make to adopt a particular kind of persona. And so the theater setting just was perfect for that. But I took it one step further because I do love structure, and I decided to read as many plays as I could get my hands on, and I started using those plays as the structure for the story. So each chapter has a reference to a play, and that referenced play is in some way a little hidden picture in the story, whether it's a character, whether it's a setting, whether it's a line. I used that to build the book.
I was flipping through the book as you were talking to try to show people an example. Here's, for instance, can I do this? Chapter 19 is called Brief Encounter. And throughout there are plays, which Lynn has wonderfully and beautifully listed. This is so hard to do, you all. In the back of the book. So in case you're tantalized and tempted by the chapter titles and the allusions, you think, oh, I think that's a play, you can go back and see what that is. But you didn't just find a play, the title of a play, and slap it onto the chapter title. Yeah. I mean, that's another gorgeous thing that you did. That, as I've said to you before, when we were earlier talking about this book a million years ago, you took something that was a brilliant idea and then raised the bar on it 100 levels.
Well, it really was something that I found a great deal of joy in doing, because as I would read the plays, something in the play might spark my interest, and I would say, oh, that could be what happens in this chapter. So, for example, Brief Encounter, read the play, understand the play, and then you'll understand why a brief encounter can be so meaningful in the middle of a crisis. What does that mean? And so the plays would inform the story as I was writing it, because I would read them and I would say, oh, there's a kernel of an idea here, or there's a character there that I have a character like that. They could think that, they could be that. And so it brought me great joy in the structuring of the story. It really did.
But tell us a little bit more about that, because I am completely fascinated by your thought process in reading a lot of plays and then taking the ones that seem to settle into your brain and then organizing them as the chapters for your book, and then not only having them be chapter headings, but have elements of the play reveal to you what the chapter might be. Did you make a million little index cards and move them around, or stickies, or just was it in your brain or a spreadsheet? How on earth did you do that?
Yeah, it was really all of the above.
Oh,
I became consumed with reading plays. And at the same time, I did keep notes and I kept track. And I said, "Ooh, there's a gorgeous landscape in that could fit here." Or there is a relationship here that feels like this relationship. How would that work? So it was really a massive jigsaw puzzle, if you will. And it did stick with me. So there would be times where I would read a play and I'd say, "There's something there, I just don't know what it is." And I'd get 3/4 into writing the draft and I'd say, "Oh, for goodness sakes, it goes right there." So it really informed the process. And I don't imagine that I will ever be able to write a novel like this one again in this way, because the setting and the story were meant to go together for me.
yes, absolutely. So you've set the setting is the theater,
Yes,
and the theme is the theater, and the theme is performance, and the actual literal setting is
exactly.
the theater. The other thing that's so fascinating about thinking about the plays that you read that you then transformed into your book is that a play is the result of the same thought process that you were going through in writing the story,
Yes.
that a playwright has also examined human nature and relationships and responsibility and secrets, and sort of distilled that into whatever theme they were going for. So
Right.
it shows you that those themes are so universal.
Yes, and I also really found it interesting as a writer to read about playwriting.
Oh,
So I read about playwriting and really came to a new understanding of character motivation, which is that an actor never steps on a stage without a motivation. Even if they're going to walk over and bump into a couch or have a glass of water, they have an intention. And so by reading what playwrights do in order to craft a play, I learned a lot about writing novels, which is that characters must always have motivations when they step into a scene. And do I know what that is? Am I always aware of what that is? So that was a wonderful lesson for me as a writer.
yes, that is brilliant. I'm sort of tucking that away in my brain. And also that the stated intention of what a character might do is different from their hidden secret intention of what they're really doing.
Exactly, which brings us to the three lead characters who each have a motivation, which is that they've been betrayed and they would love to be able to trust love again. But it's very hard to trust love when you've been betrayed. And it's very, very challenging when, in one character's case in particular, the love she wants to trust is someone who's betrayed her repeatedly, not one time, but in an ongoing way for many, many years. It's very challenging to be in a long-term relationship where betrayal is a regular pattern of behavior.
And you have to decide whether to accept it,
Yeah,
or whether at what point you're going to fight back. I mean,
that's right.
you said in one interview, someone asked you to describe your novel in 5 words, and you said theater, family, blind spots, addiction, and betrayal. So we've talked about all of those except for blind spots. I think. What is it about blind spots that's such an obstacle in people's lives? And I want to remind you all, we're talking about the dangers of an ordinary night by Lynne Reeves. And if you have a question, you have about 6 more minutes to put your question in so we can make sure that Lynn gets to them by the end of this event. So talk a little bit about blind spots and why that's so important.
Yeah, I think that when I started writing it, I really had sort of a fascination with the kinds of biases that we have in our relationships. Why do I believe something about my partner? Or why do I think something about my child? And what might change my view on that? Or is my view unchangeable? Because I see it that way. That's the only way that it can be. And so I really wanted to look at this idea of why is it that when a person struggles with addiction, we have such a hard time noticing that slide into addiction, and that we're so close to that person that we can't see certain things that are pretty darn obvious to anybody else that is looking. Why is that? And I really wanted to explore that. So the three main characters have blind spots, and they are big blind spots. What they assume to be true, they cannot let go of it. I mean, at one point the detective is absolutely certain that he knows who it is, and he sets out in a way to make that confirmation bias a reality. And that's a giant mistake if you're investigating a crime, right?
Because you're going to find what you're looking for.
Exactly. Exactly.
And I love how you took the structure of a real murder mystery, detective, missing person novel that has certain things, that certain tests that a reader will want, characters that they care about, an important problem, that the good guys win, that the bad guys get what's coming to them, that there's a marvelous, satisfying ending. And throughout, you've twisted these family secrets and letting us really, allowing us to really care about these families and hope for the best for them. Were those two parts of the book to you, or the same part?
Well, I think because I have a worldview that families are complex and that they are often messy, but we love them anyway. And that there's always hope that with good communication and with people bringing some of their issues into the light. I mean, I'm a family counselor, so my goodness, I believe to my core that talking about our challenges leave us with hope and healing. And so I really want my stories, even though they are about heavy social issues, to also leave the reader feeling like there is a positive alternative. And that, of course, is talking about these issues. I remember you had on your program William Kent Kruger once, and he talked about the novel as a social sort of opportunity to observe the condition of our society. And I really feel like that's so true. It's really an opportunity to do that, but there are solutions, and that is that we talk more about it.
I mean, it's interesting, again, when looking at it from the standpoint of a play, that there are the people who are performing in the play, the characters in your book, and then there are the people who are watching the play from the auditorium, from the theater, us readers, who are watching this performance and making opinions about that, and maybe having our eyes opened, as they are every time we go to a good play, having our eyes open to thinking about the world in a little bit of a different way. I mean, I love leaving the theater and think, oh, I never thought about it that way.
Yes. Yes.
That is observational.
And what's the best part about leaving the theater is you want to say, oh, what did you think about this? And what did you think about that? And can you believe that he did this? I mean, we engage in story not just to immerse ourselves in it, which is in and of itself wonderful, but also so that we can talk about the experience as we had it, as we were reading, as we were watching, as we were, feeling a part of that play. So that's important to me. It's important to me that the reader have an experience, just like the writer has an experience creating the art.
Exactly. And Bozenia is saying, thank you for stressing the role of hope in all of your work. And that is another thing. I agree with you, Bozenia, is that at the end, this book is optimistic. This gives us some pathways for thinking about our own lives. Phyllis is saying, I think denial makes us not see what's in front of us. She says it's almost like self-preservation.
Yes.
And that's so true. And I'm sure you agree. Can that also be dangerous?
Yes, but denial is a coping mechanism for that which feels overwhelming. So believe it or not, our brain is trying to protect us from that which feels emotionally intolerable. At the same time, denial is not recognizing a problem. It's not dealing with a scenario that is potentially dangerous, physically, emotionally, spiritually even. So I agree, denial is one of those double-edged swords. It can protect us from overwhelming emotion, but it can be dangerous.
And also I was thinking about that when you were talking about, I was thinking about the pandemic and how it's safe inside a book, that when the world outside is so terrifying, sometimes it's reassuring and comforting to be looking at someone else's problems, to be immersed in someone else's problems, that it's always safe inside this book. Someone was saying what a gorgeous cover this is. Do you know if this is actually Boston? Is this Back Bay?
Yes, it is.
Talk
It
about
is.
that.
It is Back Bay. Isn't it beautiful?
It's
I'm
beautiful.
so grateful for that cover. In keeping with your idea of being safe inside a book, I couldn't agree more. I mean, we read to navigate our lives. We are looking for some of the answers to some of the things we're worried about happening to us, and they don't need to happen to us. We can vicariously experience them in a book. Where would we be if we had to solve all of these problems in our own lives, but that we couldn't solve some of them by reading our books?
Exactly so. Exactly so. Did you know? I mean, you were talking about solving the problems, and we can put ourselves in another person's life when we're immersed and safely in a book. Did you know what was going to happen in the end as you were writing this?
I did. I knew this ending from the start, which I have to say I was grateful for, because with the crazy structure that I decided to engage with, it was at least wonderful to know what I was writing toward. I don't always know my endings. I always know that I want to explore a particular social issue, but I never want my stories to read sort of heavy-handed. Again, I don't want them to be prescriptive. I loved what you said about having them be more of an observation of an experience. That's what matters to me. But I do always know the issue. I don't always know the ending, but in this case, thankfully, I did.
Yes, it's always nice to know the ending. It's always good to know where the train is going, no matter where
Exactly.
you get there along the way. And we can take some questions for you if anybody has any questions. I'm not sure I've seen any yet. Oh, Sherry says, when did you come up with this idea? Is it recent or has it been in your mind for a while? That's a great question, Sherry. Thank you.
The idea of using the theater as a setting has always sort of always been in the back of my mind. I just never knew when I would use it, and I just trusted as a writer that when it felt right, I would know. But I always knew I would write about the theater because I just love it so much. As far as addiction goes, that's been percolating for many years, because as a family counselor, I have heard story after story of the impact of addiction on families. It wasn't really until I started to see how the theater piece and the addiction story could go together that I was ready to write it. And this novel took a few years. So I always knew I would write about theater. Addiction kept coming up, and then suddenly, once I knew that those pieces fit together, I was ready to go.
And that's the performative element you were talking about that connects them.
Yes.
Tell us about the title. I keep thinking of Smiles of a Summer Night.
Yes. So the dangers of an ordinary night. Anyone has experienced any trauma in their family, or anyone who understands the idea that you can be living a peaceful, happy life, and in the snap of a finger, everything can change, will understand the dangers of an ordinary night. The title actually came from a story that I read. It was a nonfiction piece about how little did that person know that the danger was hiding in an ordinary night. And that's when it really struck me that we can be going along thinking our families are fine and everything is rosy and everybody's doing well, when in fact, if we don't know what's truly happening, that's not true.
And there's a wonderful moment in the book where one of the girls' mothers is talking about that she knows what it's like to lose her keys, essentially, but she doesn't know what it's like to lose a daughter, and how impossible a situation that is. In fact, Sharon is saying every parent's worst nightmare is to not know where your child is. And we just assume that everything will go along in our ordinary days the way they ordinarily will, until that one unexpected thing happens and the dominoes just fall and the new performances begin.
Right. And also when a crisis occurs, and you and I talked about this a moment ago, when a crisis occurs, how it changes everything else you see. So it changes the way you see what has happened before. It didn't all make sense until after the fact. And I think you, as someone who does investigative reporting, know better than anyone that families will tell you, it wasn't until after that all the evidence was there all along. I saw it all anew, but I didn't see it when I was in it.
I mean, people say, you know, I should have known, I should have put the puzzle pieces together, I should have done that, but you don't, when it's just this little incremental step by step, and you don't take a step back and see the big picture, that everything has changed. We are almost out of time. We are talking about The Dangers of an Ordinary Night by Lynne Reeves. Lynn has so many events and so many times that she's been lucky enough to talk about this wonderful book. And we have posted in the comments where you can find Lynn if you want to hear more about The Dangers of an Ordinary Night, this chilling, emotional, heartbreaking, riveting, and wonderful book. Lynn, let me just ask you, what's it like now? Here you are talking about this book, and people are responding to you, and the book is doing so well. It's being just flying off the virtual shelves and the real shelves. Is this the reaction to this book what you hoped it would be?
Yes, it really is so far. I was afraid that people would see it as something that might be too heavy, that again, addiction is something we don't want to talk about. But again, it allows people the safe distance to talk about it. People are sharing stories with me. They understand where these characters are struggling. They have empathy for people who are making some of these challenging choices. So for that, I am super grateful. And you know, the community of readers who love mystery and crime and domestic suspense, psychological thrillers, is a marvelous community of readers who are absolutely willing to go to deep emotional places to inhabit stories. And so for that, I'm really grateful because they're getting it.
And The Dangers of an Ordinary Night, just like night, is sort of dark on the inside, but there is light at the end of it, just like there is light at the end of an ordinary night. And this book is full of light and full of optimism. And it is a life-changing and wonderful book. And again, you have about 45 seconds, you all, to leave a comment to be entered to win Dangers of, oh no, you have no more time. Dangers of an Ordinary Night. Our dear friend Sylvia Chipka Bunyani, is that? Please tell me, Sylvia, if that's correct. Sylvia, our dear friend Sylvia, has won a copy of The Dangers of an Ordinary Night. Lucky, lucky you, Sylvia. Let me quickly, before we say goodbye to Lynn, tell you that on next Tuesday we will be reading and hearing about Alice Henderson's A Blizzard of Polar Bears, a novel of suspense, as it says on the front, A Blizzard of Polar Bears, which is her second novel after A Solitude of Wolverines. So you can tell from these books, which you can read separately, that there are adventure stories about a woman who is on a mission to protect wildlife. Very exciting, very wonderful outdoor adventures. And so I hope you will join us next Tuesday at 4 to hear about A Blizzard of Polar Bears by Alice Henderson. And today we thank you, Lynne Reeves, for bringing us the inside scoop on The Dangers of an Ordinary Night. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you. This was such a pleasure. Always an honor to talk to you.
Oh my goodness, you too. Congratulations and best of luck. And to you all out there, thank you so much for joining us today, and happy reading. Stay safe, you all.